Gather your thoughts and prayers, please. All these threads have been brought forward and they're being weaved into the heart of God with the gold thread of God being woven through. So let us take a moment and give thanks for these stories. Let us bow our heads in prayer. We are filled with good intentions, Holy One, to be honest, to bear truth, to walk humbly before you and others, to be courageous when it is called upon, to be wise and respectful, and to love one another. These are just strands woven together by your holy touch of compassion and care. They create a weaving that is as diverse as creation itself and in harmony with the web of life. Take these stories that we have shared with one another, some of which radiate with joy, others tattered and broken. Take them all, and in your holiness weave them together, creating your very presence in our midst. Let our stories be woven into your love. Creator, the stories that have been created are diverse. They may be stories of great divisiveness, stories of hatred, of racism, and other destructions that work against our culture, the hearts of one another. They are sometimes hard to hold on to these strands that are so frayed, yet broken and disconnected. You are the holder of all our stories. There's one common thread that runs through them all, through each of our lives. It is a thread that brings about reconciliation and forgiveness and repentance, creating wholeness in peoples and in our communities. So we share these stories with you. Help us to hear each other's stories for the first time, so that your sturdy thread of love can mend the souls of the past, the hearts of the present, and the lives of the future, uniting us to be sisters and brothers in the web of life. Witness this. Let our love for one another expand beyond these walls, for these stories shared are just but one part of the great story that you have made for all of us. Amen. So at this time, I would like to invite Jennifer and Ed, our support her, to come forward and to then begin to explain the next part of our time together, the exercise. So.
Good afternoon. No, it's morning. It's Friday. It must be midnight. It's been a busy few weeks. I want to acknowledge the First Nations territory that we are on today. I was taught that an acknowledgement is a matter of respect, protocol, but it also requires us to be knowledgeable of the First Nations territories whose land we are on. And that acknowledgement includes understanding the challenges and the struggles that they face and working with them to address those. And I think Jacob's presentation this morning outlined some of those challenges and struggles. And as visitors on this land, it's our responsibility to work with the peoples whose land we're on to try and address those. And so with that, I also want to thank Jacob for his opening and for his words, and also for the First Nations who welcomed us to the territory this morning. I'm going to give a few words of introduction about the humble little workshop 20 years ago that has evolved into a movement of decolonization and reconciliation. A movement called the Kairos Blanket Exercise. And that was created 20 years ago in response to the report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. This morning it was mentioned that this is the 92nd annual meeting of the Toronto Conference of the United Church. Around the time that this conference was celebrating its 67th annual meeting, there was something happening not too far away in Kanesatake, Mohawk territory, that would have repercussions around the world, and especially here in Canada, in terms of the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Anybody remember what that was? Oka. It's known as the Oka crisis, but the people in Kanesatake like to call it the occupation of Kanesatake. And basically, what it involved was the town of Oka trying to expand its golf course and its housing into sacred Mohawk land. The graveyard and the pines. And the Mohawks resisted. And one of the reasons they resisted was because for years they had tried to work through the system with the government of Canada to have that land identified as Mohawk land. Twice they submitted claims to the federal government. Brian Mulroney promised that if the Mohawks and their allies stood down, he would call a royal commission to look into the situation, the Indian problem. Was kept because in 1991 they launched the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and in 1996 the Commission released its 4,000-page, 6-volume report with 440 recommendations and a 20-year plan that would have cost $20 billion to implement. This is the 20th year of that 20-year plan. And when Jacob this morning talked about imagine what it would be like if we had honored the treaties and had worked together, that was the vision of the Royal Commission. Invest 20 years of time and $20 billion of resources into a new relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples based on respect, sharing, mutual recognition of rights and responsibilities. Unfortunately, that commission's report ended up on the shelf. The Prime Minister at the time said the recommendations were too expensive to implement. And none of them have been taken very seriously. None of those 440 recommendations. The Aboriginal Rights Coalition, one of the predecessor coalitions of Kairos, at the time said, we need something that will keep alive the major themes and recommendations of the Royal Commission. And that's the blanket exercise. The commissioners said, in order to understand and address the challenges facing Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada today, and how we got to where we are. And so half of that 4,000-page report is history. And what the blanket exercise does is take us through that history in a way that is memorable, and that has an impact because it's experiential and participatory. So Jennifer and I could stand here for 45 minutes and tell you that history. Show that within 10 or 15 minutes, most of you are saying, wonder what we're going to have for lunch. Such a nice day today, outside. What the blanket exercise does is compel you, force you to be part of this teaching lesson. So I'm going to give you a gun for blanket exercise. So you guys know, today we're going to do the mass blanket exercise. And not masters in church, but masters in big blanket exercise. And it's different, but every blanket exercise is different because every time it's different people, different context, and it's a different experience. So I said that it was a humble workshop that has transformed and evolved into a movement. The exercise that we're doing today is one of a series of blanket exercises. I think there is 8 in all that will be happening across the country in provincial and territorial capitals to mark the first anniversary of the release of the 94 Calls to Action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But also to draw attention to Kairos' Education for Reconciliation Initiative and the Winds of Change campaign that is focused on trying to draw attention to the TRC's calls to action. Because those are our second chance. We weren't able to take advantage of the recommendations from the report of the Royal Commission. The TRC's calls to action. And so let's see if this time we don't drop the ball and we in fact use those to work with our Indigenous neighbors to create the kind of society that not just the Royal Commission envisioned, but that was envisioned in the original treaties that formed the foundation of this country that we now call Canada. So Jennifer's going to tell you a little bit about how it's going to work. But I'm not quite too sure how it's going to work.
So you're our first of this series of mass blanket exercises that's going to happen. But we know it's going to work because a year ago on Parliament Hill, we had a mass blanket exercise, and what's wonderful about that is we had the leadership of Indigenous young people who wanted to do that on Parliament Hill, insisted, and we were able to collaborate with them to do that. So we are all, whatever 250, 300 of us are going to participate in this exercise after lunch. So we'll ask you to convene in the gym, and I think we have helpful folks who will help you get there. When you walk into the room, the blankets will be there in the center. We're inviting you to walk into the room and to make a circle around the outside of the blankets. Maybe not, maybe it'll be too thick, but a sense of a circle around the outside. We're going to invite you to take off your shoes because that's one of the 3 rules of the blanket exercise is we need you to remove your shoes if at all possible to do that. We are going to invite you to step on to the blankets. We'll tell you when to do that, and when you step on the blankets, the other second rule is that you don't step off unless you're asked to do so, and that becomes clear as the process happens. And we'll also ask you to try and listen to the script and the narrators of the scroll and that which is being read for you. That's going to be hard and challenging with this many folks, but we're really going to ask you to listen so that you can take in this experience anew or again, new way. One of the things about the blanket exercise we know is that it's a heart, mind, body experience. And if you've participated before, you'll know that. We recognize that all of us come with diverse experiences and that it can be hard for some of us to participate. And I just want to acknowledge that there are 2 chaplains who are in the court. Ruth over here, over there, Ruth over there. and Bernadette over there, just to stand. And these folks are available, accessible to you if during the exercise or after the exercise, you're needing some support, that these folks are accessible to have that support. We are going to invite you to support each other following the exercise and to come back into this room and to, in a circle process, to debrief in table groups. So we will invite you to give that support to one another, but if you need additional support, these folks are available.
So a few minutes ago, Jennifer and I went around to your tables and handed out little packages of maps. So I'll just go over those maps quickly because they're usually something that we do at the beginning of the exercise, but we thought that it would be good to give them to you a little bit ahead of time so you can think about it over lunch, digest the information along with your food, perhaps. These maps are from the report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. And the first map, the map called Turtle Island, is a representation of the distribution of languages and cultures and societies in the territory we now call Canada, which some Indigenous people refer to as Turtle Island or in the northern part of Turtle Island. And what's important about this map is that it shows that before Europeans arrived, Indigenous peoples in Canada, First Nations and Inuit, were using and occupying all the land we now recognize as Canada. And you'll see there's distribution from coast to coast to coast. There's First Nations, we can recognize some of the names. Obviously, it's not a comprehensive map. Not all the names are there. Not all the First Nations are represented. Not all the Inuit communities are making settlement. But it's a representation of the distribution of Indigenous peoples in Canada before the arrival of Europeans. If we want to go to the second map in that package, the one called Treaties, one of our young Indigenous facilitators in Ottawa, Gabrielle Fayant, who was part of the group at Assembly of Seven Generations, the group that worked with Kairos last year, actually proposed to Kairos last year to host a mass blanket exercise on Parliament Hill. Gabrielle is a Kairos blanket exercise facilitator. When she does this part of the exercise, she says, when the treaties were negotiated and concluded, that's when we started to have borders. And you'll notice the difference between the first map and this map is that you start seeing lines on the map, whereas before it was different shades. And it even says on the map that the boundaries are approximate. These are the numbered treaties that we often hear about. People identify territory. I'm from Treaty 6. We're acknowledging we're on Treaty 8. But it's also important to see on the East Coast, the peace and friendship treaties. And for Indigenous peoples, all the treaties were peace and friendship treaties. They were all about sharing land and resources. They were not real estate deals. They were not surrender agreements. It's very important to understand that for many people, the treaties were the foundation of Canada, because without those treaties, we probably wouldn't have the kind of national boundaries that we enjoy today. And one of the biggest challenges facing the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada is the fact that the settlers, the colonial powers, did not and do not honor the treaties. What's not shown on that map is what we call the modern treaties. There's been 10 modern treaties concluded between the government of Canada and First Nations and Inuit. The historic treaties were negotiated. The first one was in the 1970s, the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, the Queen Estapi Agreement. Those 10 groups that negotiated those treaties formed a coalition. And they formed a coalition because they had one thing in common. We just had that exercise, one thing you have in common. The thing that these 10 groups have in common is that the federal government did not live up to their part of the modern treaty. Well, the blanket exercise isn't a history lesson. It's a way to help us to understand where we are today. And we need to understand the historical part, but we also need to understand how it connects to what the reality is today. So I ask you now to go to the third map, the one that's called Aboriginal Lands Today, and it just shows 3 snapshots. It also shows territory below the 49th parallel. And in the old days, I used to say those little black spots above the 49th parallel, those aren't problems with my photocopier. Those are reserve lands. And as it says in the caption there, if you add up all the reserve land in all of Canada below the 60th parallel, so in other words, we don't count the territory of Nunavut, all that land adds up to 1/2 of 1% of Canada's land mass. And some of the First Nations people I work with say that's even generous approximation. It's even less than that. And another way to represent that is shown in the middle snapshot there, where in the lower corner there's a large dark area identified as the Navajo Reservation in the United States. And inside that dark area, there's a light area called which is the Hopi Reservation. And if you add up all the reserve land in all of Canada, it doesn't add up to the amount of land that the Hopi have in the United States. So what the commissioners are trying to help us to understand is how did we go from the first map, how did we go from Turtle Island to the third map, Aboriginal Lands Today? Did the Indigenous people surrender voluntarily 99.5% of their territory? What was going on during those 500 years? What is going on today? Jacob talked about the things that have been lost. He mentioned the loss of land. Some people summarize the entire 6-volume, 4,000-page report of the Royal Commission with one 4-letter word. Not the ones you're thinking about. But it's land. It's all about access to the land and its resources. So there's pictures of the mass blanket exercise on Parliament Hill last year, the first one. I'll just leave you with one thought. 26 years ago, the Mohawks stood in defense of their territory over a land rights issue. 26 years later, that land rights issue is still unresolved. A few days ago, Ellen Gabriel, who was the spokesperson for the people in Nazadage back in 1990, attended a city council meeting in Oka to protest plans for a 400-unit housing development in the same place that started the Oka crisis. So we have lots of work to do. And what was most unsettling is that the community at this meeting, the members of the community who were challenging Ellen Gabriel's position that this is Mohawk territory, this is unresolved land rights issues, were raising the same tired but persistent myths and stereotypes about Indigenous peoples that many of us had thought and had hoped were things of the past. So I hope that after we do the blanket exercise this afternoon, get closer to resolving issues that unfortunately are still so prevalent in our society. And that we'll be one step closer to working genuinely in partnership and in friendship with, as Murray St. Clair said, in our Indigenous neighbors. Thank you kindly. We'll see you after lunch.
Thank you, Ed and Jennifer. And so as we prepare ourselves to continue to deepen into our stories, to crack our hearts open, to allow space for healing to grow, let us join together in singing the song Deep in Our Hearts. Our heart will be brought forward, the weaving together of the stories we have shared today, reminding us of how God's love weaves us together and brings us to wholeness. Deep in our hearts. And so as we continue to journey together, allowing our stories to be woven into God's love, may we be open to the healing, to reconciliation, the call to justice, and the vision to wholeness that stirs deep in our hearts. May it be so. Amen.
Let's draw our attention to the opening motions that is present on the screen.
So, hello everyone, I'm David Allen, the Executive Secretary, and I want to tell you first of all about a moment of humility this morning that I had. I was in the office and Rose Kimborn gave me a water bottle that we're using this year, and so I took some water and promptly it spilled all over me. I thought, well, that's odd. And so I did it a second time and still more water on it. And finally, two of the staff says, you know, it's a sippy cup. Now I know how to drink from the cup. I had another moment of humility about a week and a half ago when I was talking to someone about the business that's coming before us this weekend. And the person says, I know that you have already thought about this, but have you thought about quorum? And I thought, no, I actually haven't thought about quorum. Because sometimes I don't want to know the answer. Some of our presbyteries have already gone through this, where it's a struggle to make sure that you have quorum. So for those of you who don't know it, quorum is the minimum number of people who must be in the room to make it an official meeting. So what we're going to do for the first time ever in the conference, to my knowledge, is that we are going to check to make sure that we have quorum. The way we're going to do that is that we're actually going to count who's here. The way we're going to do it is that if you have a white voting card, you're going to hold it up when I ask you to hold it up, and the scrutineers are going to count. Now, on the screen, you can see maybe a little bit hard to read. Yeah, so something it's a little difficult here, but just so that you know, the way we calculate quorum is that we have to have 20% of those who are members of the court. The members of the court are all the ministers retired on the roll. So that's a very large number you can see there. Then we have all of the lay people whose names have been given to us by the presbyteries, and you'll probably remember the motions that your presbytery passed to allow you to come here to be a voting person. When we add those together, that gives us the total number of people who are on the roll of conference, and we need 20% of those. So as you can see, we need 175 people to be in the room to make sure that we have quorum. If we get 175, then we need to make sure that of all of us who are present, 1/3 are lay people, and 1/3 are over ministry, designated lay ministers who are in the midday. So we're going to start off by doing the count of who's here. And so, scrutineer, are you ready? Go. So if you have a voting card, please hold it up now and keep it held up until you can count it. If you have a voting card, hold it up.
Slower. Any guesses? We take some guesses on the corner chart. Have a little ready. 102. Okay. Any guess? 190. Okay, what's your number? Did you guess? Yes. Yes. What's been just? Yeah, 202. I'm going to guess 185. Hans, do you have a bet for our guessing?
Taking guesses. Years. Right now, you're giving the number. That's right. As the president said, somebody said, I can't hear you. The president says, then stop talking. So what's happening right now is that scrutineers are giving the numbers to Rose. Rose is adding them up. John is then going to put them on the screen, and we'll find out whether we get 175 people. The answer is?
David, do we need a drum roll for that?
Okay, so here's the deal. We do not have quorum. So one option is for us all to go home. Okay, so this is kind of the scenario we didn't want to run into, obviously. So what we're going to, what the business committee is proposing is that we continue the gathering. It won't be the annual meeting. So we'll continue as a gathering. And what we'll do is that we'll go through all of the presentations and the workshops and things like that. The thing that obviously we're most concerned about is what happens if we actually have to vote on something. And so, yeah, like things like the candidates for ordination and admission. The proposals tomorrow. There's at least 8 people. I can see one of them looking at me right now. A little concerned. Yeah. Now, in your packet, you also have these cards, warm and cool cards. So the way we're going to use these this year, if we don't have quorum, is that at some point, the president, as we're going along through our proposal, the president will say, are you warm or cool with that idea? If we see that virtually everybody is holding up this kind of a card, then the executive will have a really clear sense as to what the mood is in the court. If it looks like this, it will also provide a clear sense. If it's mixed, then the executive may say to itself, okay, maybe we need to have more conversation about this, and they'll be guided by the conversation that's already gone on within this gathering. So we'll have to practice that a few times to make sure we understand how to use the warm and cool cards, and we'll do that in a minute when we actually start dealing with the opening motions, which now won't be opening motions. It'll be something different. The question about those who are being ordained or admitted this afternoon, we already have the ballots being produced. So what we're proposing to do around that is that we'll have the ballots as we normally would. Kirsty Hunter will give the presentation of the candidates, we'll hear from them. We'll be asking you to mark the ballots, but you won't actually be voting. You'll be giving advice to the conference executive, which will then pass the motion probably sometime tomorrow afternoon. So is that fairly clear about the situation that we're dealing with right now? So
Yeah,
there are mics.
Oh, right, but there are mics. Where are they?
There is no mic back there, so.
Okay, so we'll have,
It's really loud.
no, we'll have people run the mics to you.
So Mike, this. Just as God.
Okay, we're going to use this mic over here. Yeah, so can we put the mic down on the floor? So we don't have to have that. And so if anybody has questions, if you could come to this mic now.
Cynthia O'Connell, People United Toronto Southeast. My question is, are we going to check quorum again later in the afternoon to see if we've got those extra 4 people? And then my second question is, if we don't, what are we going to do moving forward to ensure we have quorum? It is only 20%, and I think for a lot of people that this is not acceptable.
The next time when quorum will really be crucial, it's not crucial because the executive can take the actions this year. But the next time that we could check it would be at 4 o'clock before we actually hear from the candidates that are ministry. If we have quorum at that point, then what we can do is that we could proceed as an annual meeting and you actually would be voting. So is that something that people would like to do? Okay.
Lauren, everybody Lauren to that idea? Are you cool to that idea? Or Warren? We're good. Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard, and so in using these, when the president says, you're a chatty crowd. When the president says, are you warm or cool, we want you to hold up whichever one at the same time. So we'll see a sea of warm or cool at the same time. Okay? So it's not actually a vote. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that Norm?
Yeah, sorry.
Here's the mic. Oh,
You
you
do
don't
really
want
come
to
to this one, I don't know what Norm Seeley, Toronto Southeast Presbytery. Just for clarity, so the executive, however, is not bound by the orange and blue cards. That's simply an indication of how the body feels what the executive can do as they choose.
Yes, technically that's true. That this gathering can force the executive to take a particular action. The executive will clearly be guided by what appears here. But if we got into a situation where it was almost impossible to tell which way the court was going, or the gathering was leaning, then obviously the executive is going to have to weigh for in its own mind what it should do.
I just want you to follow me there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for clarity? Louise?
Yes, Louise Wood, Southwest Presbytery. A number of our peers are unavailable because they're on sabbatical. Is that taken into consideration? Because my assumption is like they're on sabbatical, you're not required to be here.
The requirement for quorum is that you be order of ministry or a lay person designated to be here. And so whether you're on sabbatical or you're in the hospital is not part of it. So we look at the raw numbers.
Right.
And we don't go into exceptions.
No
So
exceptions.
That's where the 175.
Okay, so it's like theory. In order to not be here, I have to have broken arms, broken legs, and a coronary.
We would feel really sorry for you.
I like prayer.
We can probably read that.
Agree with that.
But it
Okay,
wouldn't-
so it's like the
wouldn't-
meter.
It would not affect quorum.
Okay.
So shall we all go to our devices and text our colleagues? Go about it to business in the orderly fashion.
What George was saying was that should we all be going to our devices and encouraging colleagues to be here to be here. Is that paraphrasing it correctly?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. We also know that tomorrow, we've heard from a number of people who are here now who won't be able to be here because of family commitments or funerals or that sort of thing. So, we may run into this problem again. So the more people we can get here, the better. So what we're proposing, and what we've heard from you, is that we'll do another count at 4 o'clock this afternoon to see where we are. So we'll proceed with the normal agenda as you've seen it. And at 4 o'clock, we'll check. If we have quorum, that's great. We'll be actually voting at that point. If we don't have quorum, then we'll continue on. And so we'll just keep on checking on quorum. So that's what I think I'm hearing from you. No other comments? Okay, so having said all that, if you could turn in your workbook to page 10. Okay, so in your workbook on page 10, you'll find that there are 2 opening motions. The first is a very long motion, and it has a lot of pieces to it. What I want to do is to draw to your attention 3 particular items, and we'll have these on the screen. So if you look, first of all, on page 11, item I, that talks about the method of voting. So we can have that on the screen. There was some additional wording. There was some additional wording that we put in that didn't get into your workbook. And so the additional wording is, unless the court decides otherwise, voting will be done by voting cards. And the reason